Greenland, a name that conjures images of wilderness and extreme cold, but which is also entering the conversation as a travel destination as new airline routes open up. In this film, I hope to broaden your knowledge of this very special place. So is Greenland a country? Well, there's no simple answer to that. Here's a better question. Is it a nation state? Answer, no. To fully explain, let's go back to basics. Geographically, the island of Greenland is part of North America. Historically, world maps have shown it as being far larger than it really is, given the massive exaggeration applied to the northern hemisphere. It is not as big as Africa, as I used to think as a child. However, it is still big, about the size of Saudi Arabia, or 3 times the size of Texas. Most of the island is covered by a thick ice sheet, 1.8 million square kilometres of ice sheet. Historically, the population has had no choice but to cling to the coast. It's believed that the first settlers were Vikings around the year 982. Eric the Red brought his followers here after being expelled from Iceland. It's thought that he called this new land Greenland in an attempt to lure more settlers to his new colony. Calling this place White Land would not have attracted anybody. This was Eric the Red's great con trick. There are some patches of greenery in the far southwest, but in reality this land was far less hospitable than Iceland. Although it's believed that there was some contact, most of the Norse settlements lay abandoned by the time that the first Inuit communities took root on the west coast. What exactly happened to the Norse remains a mystery, although we know that some of Eric's Vikings moved on to what is now Newfoundland in Canada. Most Greenlanders trace their ancestry to the Tula civilization that arrived from Alaska and northern Canada around the 13th century. In 1721, the Danes arrived, and Greenland was designated a colony of Denmark. Home Rule came into force in 1979, and in 2009 Home Rule extended to self-governance, ensuring an even greater degree of autonomy. Therefore, although not fully independent, most Greenlanders will describe their land as a country. Greenland is, specifically, a parliamentary democracy within the Kingdom of Denmark, as are the Faroe Islands. But unlike Denmark, Greenland is not part of the EU. I told you it wasn't a simple question. Greenland also has its own flag. Using the same colours as the Danish flag, it represents the ice cap, the glaciers, the sun and the icebergs. In Greenlandic, this land is called KALAALLIT NUNAAT, which translates to the land of the Greenlanders. It is also sometimes called Inuit Nunaat, which means land of the people. The mother tongue and official language in Greenland is Greenlandic. Danish arrived when the land was Christianised in the 18th century and functions as a second language. There are 3 main dialects, one in the north, one in the east and one in the west. Given that almost all of the population lives in the west, it is this dialect that is regarded as standard Greenlandic. It is closely related to the language spoken by Inuit in Canada and Alaska. Greenland's entire population is a little over 55,000, around half of which live in the capital of Nuuk. Here is where you'll find the parliament, the university, and most of the employment opportunities. If you've been travelling elsewhere in Greenland, when you arrive here in Nuuk, it really does feel like the big city. By contrast, East Greenland is almost empty. There are just a handful of settlements, like Kulusuk. There are times in life when a flight alteration works to your advantage. I never imagined that I would ever visit the remote settlement of KALAALLIT on the east coast of Greenland. And yet, here we are. Further to the northeast, the settlement of Iitokutumit, excuse my pronunciation, is one of the most remote in the world. And even further north is the Northeast Greenland National Park, the world's largest. Very few people have ever set foot in this spectacular wilderness. As the west coast is more accessible, the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Ilulissat Ice Fjord is Greenland's most famous natural attraction. The town of Ilulissat looks out over the fabulous Disco Bay. Well, it's almost too incredible to put into words. Across the icebergs of Disco Bay to the snowy peaks of Disco Island. And it's a scene that changes with every minute of every day. The 5,000 human inhabitants of the town share it with 3,000 sled dogs, who provide a howling soundtrack to everyday life here. Feeding time for the sled dogs. Until late 2024, all international flights to Greenland landed at Kangerlussuaq, an old US military base. To get to Nuuk or any of the other major settlements, you then needed to take another flight. A new airport at Nuuk and a new airport to come at Ilulissat have changed that, allowing Greenlanders more efficient connections and, of course, more routes for travellers coming the other way. The first ever direct flight from Nuuk to the United States is a game changer. Greenland now faces new possibilities and huge challenges. In a fragile environment with a very small population and limited infrastructure, tourism must be managed carefully. Currently, for example, there are only a handful of small hotels. Foreign investment is needed, but not at the expense of the Greenlanders and their unique culture and environment. This special corner of the planet must be protected and cherished. Greenland is not for sale, either to private companies or anyone else. The only people who should determine Greenland's future are the Greenlanders.